In your experience in the last 10 years doing this, you've probably seen kids with amazing talent and you've seen kids with average talent. Can you talk a little bit about the kids that have taken their talent and then just reached heights that they didn't even know they could reach?
Yeah, we have a ton of their jerseys hanging on our walls. We actually do
Love it.
have a bunch of, middle schooler to big league athletes. Um, so it's just want to get in front of, like you said, you guys have really good coaches. Really good coaches are really good mentors and really good people, and then you want them just to be around good people and keep developing. It's hard to say that at 12 you're going to be a big leaguer. I mean, it's even hard to say as a first rounder that you're going to be a big leaguer, right? So the goal is just to keep building on every single year, making sure that you're on good coaches, you're on good people, you enjoy doing as the athlete, that you enjoy doing all the stuff that it takes to be, greater every single day, and then enjoying the process. Like I said, we do have a lot of, you know, guys on our wall, jerseys are hanging on our wall that started at the gym when they were 13, 14 years old. And, now they're, big leaguers, or they, had an opportunity to throw in a big league games. And, some of those 12-year-old kids, you'd probably never guess were going to be big leaguers. They just didn't miss a beat, right? They never gave up. They never stopped. They hit their training sessions when they needed to. They listened to their coaches when the coaches were giving them advice, stuff like that.
So now we're back. We're here with Andrew Lysy with Cressey Sports Performance. Welcome to the podcast, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, guys.
Yeah. So in our previous podcast, we name dropped you in Cressey Sports Performance. And as we mentioned in our intro, we did get a chance to talk to you one time. But before we get into this podcast is really focusing on youth sports, youth baseball training, kind of that little league to middle school age. It's the off season for most of them. We wanted to hear a little bit about your background and how you got into this side of the business for baseball.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. So I'm originally from New Jersey, so it's a little bit different than Florida, and that's for sure regarding,
Me too.
what the off season looks like and what is, in season looks like, even just from like a weather standpoint. So, like I said, originally from New Jersey, played high school baseball in Central Jersey, moved on to college baseball at Rowan University, which is in South Jersey, kind of by Philly, but on the Jersey side, obviously. And started off really, really hot my freshman year before ultimately blowing out my elbow towards the end of the season. Well, obviously, it was the end of my season for sure.
Right.
And then had Tommy John surgery
Mm-hmm.
like 2 or 3 weeks later, and that was 2012. So 2012 Tommy John surgery is like the wild, wild west. What do you do? My remember my head coach was somebody who I really, really looked up to. It was like a fatherly figure, at Rowan. Shout out to Juan Arnero. And I remember him looking at me and being like, "Hey, dude, I just never done this before. I have no idea what to do. We're gonna go through this together." And as a 19-year-old kid, you're like, awesome. And then you're like, oh, wait, that doesn't sound too, convincing or, anything like that. So to be honest with you, that was something that threw my baseball career for a massive whirlwind. I don't think I ever like really physically came back from the surgery, but I think a lot of it had to do with more of the training and the rehab side of things. Obviously 2012 was, it wasn't as common to have Tommy John surgery, especially in college. I know I was the first person in my college, in the history of my college, while playing baseball, to go through Tommy John surgery. So I kind of set the foundation for that. And sometimes that's not always good, especially trying to figure it out as you go. But ultimately, I knew it was going to blow out at some point. My elbow hurt for most of my little league and high school career, which is ironic about this podcast, as we're going to end up talking about situations like that. So,
Right.
played baseball for a few years after that. I obviously sat out my sophomore year. So it was like about a 18-month recovery. So sat out my sophomore year of baseball. Stayed at Rowan all the way through. Played my junior, senior, and then a little bit of my fifth year. But I didn't really want to play because I had an opportunity to intern at Cressey that I really wanted to
Right.
prepare for. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, I ultimately just never really like physically came back from it, and then it turned into a massive mental, downslope of I don't feel good and I'm throwing harder, but just my elbow hurts so dang bad that I'm not able to like actually throw, and become a pitcher again. I felt like I was just always chasing feeling good instead of chasing performance, which, I feel like some people, find themselves in those, like I said, those massive like rabbit holes of like how to even get out of,
Right.
being injured and get into that performance side again. So
Right.
was going into my fourth year of baseball. So at this point in college, so at this point I'm turning 22, I believe. It was the summer of 2015, and I was looking for opportunities to go play, summer baseball, and I saw online that Cressey Sports Performance just opened up a spot in Florida, and I knew I could get into the South Florida League, which is about 45 minutes south of where Cressey Jupiter originated.
Right.
So I went down there in the summer of 2015, and I remember scheduling my eval before I even got down there. Man, I was so excited. I'm like, I wonder if this is gonna, help my elbow out. Like, this is exactly what I need. So I ultimately went down there to train, and then baseball was second. I remember telling my parents that I was going down there strictly to play baseball, and yeah, obviously my parents were upset when they found out that I lied to them, but it
Ah,
it ultimately worked out for the better.
sure.
But yeah, so I remember, walking into the gym the first day, who walked in with this. He was the director of performance at the time. He was named Tim Jeremini, and I just remember looking around at the gym and being like, "Wow, this is sick! Like this is exactly what I've always wanted to do." And I kind of had an idea about it when I was at Rowan. But Rowan at the time was a small exercise science department, and they didn't really specialize in strength and conditioning. It was more like general fitness. I remember one of the professors telling me like it's hard to get a career in that, but it's really easy to get a career in, personal training and working with, adults. So it was more of like the, getting adults healthy from like a, standpoint of like blood pressure, stuff like that, than it was actual like performance stuff. So had an opportunity to, like I said, train at Cressey, walked in the gym the first day, told Tim Jeremini, hey, this is exactly what I want to do with the rest of my life. And he was like, okay, cool. Let's chat about it in a few months when you head out, and we'll see what we can do. And, at the time, there was an intern there named Matt Hinckley who ended up becoming one of our pitching directors for 2 years while I was down at the Cressey facility 10 years later. And now he's one of the coordinators for the Cubs. So it was really funny how that worked out. But
Right.
apparently Tim told Matt, like, hey, just, keep an eye on this guy. Let's see if he'd be a good fit for, our internship. And obviously, back then in 2015, like Cressey wasn't as big as it is now. We're, 10 years later from that. And, the amount of pro guys that walk through the door on a regular basis is like, tenfold what it was back then. So I just knew that it was a good opportunity. Did the eval. I remember walking out of the office the first day after I trained, or the facility, and I just remember like moving my hips around and being like, whoa, I feel so much different.
Right.
And I was, yeah, like I said, I was 22, so I was going into my 23rd year, fifth year, and I was just, I felt like $1 million, man. Every time I left there, it was like finally somebody that like knew what I needed from both like the physical and mental standpoint. I think a lot of my mental was more physical. Like I think if I would have felt better, I don't think I would have thought the same way that I did.
Mm.
And it was like somebody really knew what they were doing. They believed that I could get back to being healthy, and then I actually felt better, which was huge. So I remember having a conversation with Tim, and he's like, "Yeah, dude, like you're more than welcome to come intern here whenever you want." And I was like, "Awesome, let me call my parents." Right, had an internship spot lined up for a spot in New Jersey. I told my parents, I'm like, hey, like this is a, Cressey Sports Performance, like a dream job. Like it's a really, really good opportunity. Obviously, I'm gonna have to, move across, the country from Jersey to Florida, spend 3 months there, blah, blah. And after some convincing, they finally let me do it. So in the summer of 2016, I moved back down to Florida, and I interned there, and man, it changed my life. I learned so much about strength and conditioning. I learned so much about the eval. It was the beginning phases of our pitching department, so I learned a lot about that because I ended up throwing with a lot of the guys.
Right.
One of the big things that we specialize in, which I'll talk more about later, is all of our eval for the most part is directly correlated with how guys throw. And I remember like just having that aha moment with like, man, like if this guy is really stiff hips, like he's not going to be able to like get in and out of his hips, right? If he has a hard time getting his arm overhead, when he's doing this specific eval, this movement eval, he's going to have a hard time like getting his arm overhead to throw a baseball. And I remember like learning, like just having this aha moment like 2 months in, and I'm like, oh man, that makes so much sense, right? So I think I ended up like training myself into really bad outcomes, honestly. Again, 2012, there wasn't a ton of information about TJ. There wasn't a ton of information about training. Like my first 2 years at Rowan, we didn't even have a strength coach. So I was going into the rec center ripping weights myself and, ultimately trying to figure it out. And, what's crazy is I was really, really loose, and I'm still really loose. Like I could, do this with my hands, hypermobility.
Right.
So I thought
Okay.
training would help me and make me stiffer.
Right.
And I think I got to the point where it made me so stiff that I couldn't move, right? And I threw away harder, and you're like, oh, like that, it's what I wanted. But again, it didn't make a difference because my elbow kept barking at me.
Right.
So
Right.
learned so much there. That place changed my life. Some of the biggest mentors I've had in this world, I met at that internship. So then I moved around a little bit. I moved back to Jersey, helped a spot start. It was called Be First Performance. And then, my parents moved to Virginia. My aunt and uncle lived down there, and I've always wanted to move south in a sense. So, I left about a year and a half later. My buddy, Connor Brew, he opened up a really big time spot in Jersey called Thunder and Lightning Performance, which is very similar to what we do. And they're 10 years, I think, rolling. When did it move out? 2017. So almost 10 years. So I think he started up in 2017. He's got two full-time coaches, like a really, really, big time business in New Jersey. So he's killing it there. I moved to Virginia, met some people there, kind of wanted to explore, other opportunities. So like I said, at this point, like I've never really met Eric, but I would keep tabs with him.
Mhm.
And, reached out to him, one day, and I was like, hey, like, I'm thinking about going into pro ball. Do you have any, opportunities or ideas? And again, at this point, we're like 2018. So he's not even with the Yankees yet. And he actually emailed me back. I remember where I was and emailed me back. He said, actually, I have a better idea for you. He goes, um, why don't you send me your cell phone number and I'll give it to Pete Dupuis? And I was like, oh man, I'm about to get a job at Cressey, Mass. And I've never been up there before, right? Like my only experience ever at Cressey was the 3 months of training in Florida and then my 3 month internship.
Right.
So he calls me and he goes, hey, we'll give you a 6 month contract starting August. I think it was August of 2018. I think at this point it's like July. So he's like, you got 6 weeks up, 6 weeks to get up here. I'm not going to help you find housing. Good luck. Let me know if it works out. And I was like, sounds great. So I flew up to Boston with my mom. My dad has two sisters that live up there. They met me, one of them met me up there. We kind of gallivanted around looking for housing, and I found a house. And then, next thing you know, I go up there full time. So I had a 6 month contract, and I think I'm about to be at, I think I just passed 8 years. So a 6 month contract turned into 8 years later. I just
Nice.
signed a 3 year contract. So I'm about to go from, I think, 8 to obviously 11, or going to be 10 full years going into 11 by the time my next contract's up. So
Wow.
it seemed like it all worked out the way it should and for the better.
Yeah.
Right.
But
And what a journey.
Wow.
oh yeah, it was awesome, man. I think I would have probably tried to rush it a lot faster if I knew this was the way that I was supposed to go.
So
But I'm
I have
thankful.
a specific question for you.
Yep,
So Johnny had the repair
yep.
with
Right.
a Dr. Dugas down at Andrews.
And that was 2016. So that
Right.
was like brand new.
But
Yeah, I was about to say that's probably brand new.
he had the PRP
I did too. That made me
prior.
almost
He had
throw
it
up.
prior to it. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, the neat. Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
I was the same way.
So you had the PRP injection after your Tommy John because
Yeah, so I
you
had I
still
had
had problems
full Tommy John surgery.
full time.
It was Dr. Craig Morgan, who wasn't really big in elbows, it was more shoulders. He did Kurt Schilling's shoulder back in the day when I guess he was at the Phillies, because it was one of the Phillies doctors at the time.
Right.
Uh,
And then I just had so many issues afterwards that I was trying everything I could. So I did get a PRP injection. I don't remember when it was, maybe like 2014 or 2013. Like it wasn't even a thing. Like insurance didn't cover it. You kind of just had to pay out of pocket.
I
So I
remember
just
that
messed.
too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I kind of just messed around with it and like kind of worked a little bit, but I think ultimately, like, unfortunately, we're so good at Tommy John rehab right now. Like, I mean, I've evaled like 10 kids in the last 2 months. Like, we have a very black and white plan that usually, for the most part, 99% of the time works as long as there's no like crazy hiccups. And I just don't think that was. common back then. And I think that's ultimately why I was just chasing so many different things to try to figure out what was going to work, from
Right.
the on ramping with the throwing to the right training to the right rehab. Like, that's what's best about our spot is we have everything right there. We have,
Right.
a physical therapist just texted me about, one of the big leaguers that we're going to collaborate with together because, he's got some elbow stuff. And then our manual therapist is helping him with his knee. So, like, we're all in a group chat. And it's like, hey, what's all your thoughts? Can you send me the program? Right. So, like, we all collaborate together, which is huge because you don't really see that in pro ball, and you definitely don't really see that in, the college setting. So,
So before we get to the youth training side, you mentioned all these pro ball guys. We're very interested in learning about what you can share about your experiences with dealing with some of the best baseball players in the world.
yeah. Well, they're all normal people, and sometimes they don't really like to talk about baseball. So that's one of the things that we always tell our new coaches and our new interns is, when they're obviously people you see on TV your whole life, but try to talk to them about something other than baseball. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, Lou Trevino is one of my really good friends. Like we see him and his wife and his daughter, regularly in the off season, go out to breakfast, go to their house. Michael Walker comes in and out of our facility. He moved his whole family down here. Been fortunate enough to work with Justin Verlander pretty much every day in the offseason. That's actually coming in tomorrow for his eval since I think 2021. So it was the year he had TJ. He sat out that whole year. We worked together, and then he came back and he won a Cy Young, and he actually gave us all a shout out. So me, Eric Cressey, and Eric Schoenberg, we all worked together to help him out during that process. And when he got his Cy Young award that following year in New York, he gave us a huge shout out, which was awesome.
It was. Yeah, we saw that.
That's
That
unreal.
stuck out. Thanks for sharing that. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, it's cool.
our listeners and anybody watching. I mean, that's big time. I mean, you're talking about how well. I won't ask how old he is. That's rude. But he's a
He's
guy.
old, man.
He's a guy that he's a guy that won his last Cy Young in his late 30s. So I mean,
Yeah,
Unreal.
obviously
yeah. I
the work
think
he put in with you guys is paid off tremendously.
Yeah, I think he'll be 43 in February. But let me tell you, man, he moves around like a kid. I've never seen somebody with such fast feet, even at that age. Like, I don't even see anybody with that fast feet, even when they're, college and first few years of pro ball.
Right.
There's a reason he's one of the best, man. He can do some crazy things even at, 42, 43. So,
Well, first ballot Hall of Famer in our opinion for sure, and
yep, no
great,
doubt.
great to hear that that he gave you the shout out, and
Yeah, appreciate it.
well deserved there for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
real quick, just that these world class athletes, when you talk to them, the normal people, the mindset's got to be a little bit different, especially their training. You mentioned Verlander's just he's a kind of a freak of nature. He's just even at his age now, he's still moving like a younger
Yeah.
rookie. What kind of mindset do these guys have that a younger player or athlete hasn't quite gotten there yet? What can you kind of share about that?
I feel like obviously like ultimately this is a job for them, right? So
Yeah.
they're so far into their job that they don't ever second guess themselves. I think if they have to like refine themselves, that's one thing. But I vividly remember, like you said, JB had TJ probably, let's say like he's 37, 38, 39, somewhere around them. And, probably everybody in the world is like, oh, his career's over. And there was like no doubt in his mind that like it wasn't even a single thought that he was going to come back and play baseball. It was almost like he would like laugh if somebody would say that, because it was, you just knew it, right? And I think that's what it comes down to is like these guys are so confident in what they're doing and they're so confident in their process. And obviously the elite big leaguers are a little bit different than our younger minor leaguers that are trying to navigate through, just getting drafted and everything like that. So um yeah, I mean, some of these guys, man, you're just so gifted and so talented and so blessed with their abilities. And it depends on the level and how many years they've been in the show. And like, we have a bunch of really young minor leaguers that have been hurt for a long time and have 3 or 4 years into pro ball has never thrown an inning. And they come to us and they're starting to feel better and trend in the right direction. So obviously those conversations are more about like making them smile and making them laugh and enjoying life again because they absolutely can't stand the concept of them trying to throw a baseball, and every time they do it, for 4 years they've been hurt. I mean, like I said, I understand that life. So, but we have guys that met with a guy, who was having elbow and shoulder pain consistently after having elbow and shoulder surgery back to back years, and he was still throwing 98, right? It's like, dude, some of these guys are like, he was a maybe third or fourth year in the organization with the Orioles. So these guys are just so special, and it's a lot of like, when they get older, their mindset is like, this is a job. I have to make sure that I'm really good at my job. It's like, hey, I've been working for Cressey for 8 years. Like if I didn't know how to write programs and I didn't know how to do evals, like I'd be bad at my job. I probably wouldn't have my job. Right. So it's a lot of that type of, mental capacity when they're older. And then when they're younger, they're obviously still trying to figure it out. So just navigating them through like injuries, who should they see? Manual therapist? Should I see a physical therapist? Stuff like that.
So when we first talked, you did recommend that we look at the FMS and make sure that if we're talking to athletes that that they're getting some sort of an evaluation. You recommended we go to the Elite Baseball Development podcast, and I just saw I saw a couple of them, and obviously very interesting. They're for anybody who's listening. If you go to the site, and we'll put it in the description. It's a short podcast. Usually, they're great for taking some specific topic and then really letting people know what they should know about the topic and then how they can expand on it. I listened to the one that Eric did about micro trauma and compounding and things like that, and I found it fascinating. I definitely plan on following up with that. I did get a kick out of the Cresseyisms. Are there a lot of those? Like this?
Yes.
Okay. So I started flipping around and I'm like, I wrote down small hinges,
Swing big doors. Yep.
swing big doors. Like there was just so many
You
of them.
can't shoot a canoe out of a can, or a cannon out of a canoe, right? That's a
Shoot a
staple.
cannon out of a canoe.
Yeah.
Okay. I knew you
Yeah.
would know them. So thank you for sharing that and getting us kind of up to speed.
Yeah, I've been actually fortunate enough to share an office with him for the last 5 years.
Okay.
So I should know more than just two, but it's, there's so many that it's hard to remember all
No,
of them.
they were great. But as we kind of turn our attention to, it's the off season, and this is the way Johnny and I look at it. So a lot of kids have just played, they played their school ball in the winter, then they played their summer ball. Some of them might be, they might be playing a little fall ball. Many of them have decided, I'm just going to train or get ready for the next school season, which really, I think January 6th is when down here in Alabama where we are.
Us too. Yep.
Yeah, so they can officially, get on the field, but they can obviously get in the weight room and do all these things. And so we shared with you when we first talked to you was we just see so many kids just doing the wrong things. They're like picking stuff up from maybe older kids that they think is the right way. And so what we wanted to share a little bit in this podcast is, kind of the steps that you go to. They have maybe, let's say I think Eric said in the major leagues, they have like a 19-week off season. And he was really against the mistake of taking a full month off. Like, yes, you need to rest, but maybe you can talk a little bit about in the macro what off season really means in terms of rest and recovery versus training.
Yeah.
And starting there for youth.
Yeah. So I would say that that's more recent that Eric's talking about too, because I want to say maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, guys were like adamant on taking time off. But now it seems like guys do way better from a recovery standpoint and preparing themselves to get back on the mound by like just lightly moving their arm throughout the off season or even their like deload period. So a lot of our guys like maybe will take 2 weeks off, but there's a lot of guys that are like, hey, I'm gonna like take 2 weeks off and then they'll light toss Monday, Wednesday, Friday for those 2 weeks.
Right.
So I think the biggest thing that to answer that question, the two biggest words are the deload and then the revamp or the buildup, right? So, obviously Florida and even in Alabama in the South, it's like Texas drastically different than New Jersey where I come from, right? Like you really can't throw in the winter because it's cold and there's snow on the ground, right? Where these athletes that I'm meeting specifically that are 12, are usually hurt from playing year round, right? So it's not taking like time off from throwing. Well, ultimately you take time off from throwing when you're hurt, so you're going to get to that at some point if you don't do this the right way.
Right.
But it's more of like, using the fall as a massive deload and then rebuilding the proper way, to make sure that you're ready for, January, February, March, because obviously, January through August is a really long time, right? So, especially when they're really young. So yeah, it's more of like a deload and then a rebuild than it is just completely shut down or completely just keep throwing all the way through. So one of the biggest things I specifically try to do is I actually try to get athletes in Florida, mainly because they can play year round, and we've had a lot of guys that are more like 15, 16, 17 that are elite arms. They'll try to play in the fall and they ultimately get hurt, and we've had two guys in the last 2 years that are high level like D1 draft arms that are 16 years old that are going to have to get or have had surgery or going to have to get surgery because they didn't shut down when they were supposed to, or they're very inconsistent. So they'll shut down, but then they'll go to a showcase 2 weeks later and they don't realize like, hey, like you're not 12 anymore. You can't just shut down and then throw it again, especially when you throw 97, right? So it's a try to tell athletes not to play fall ball, give it a 2 week like deload, whatever that means to the athlete, and then we'll rebuild from there, both which are with our pitching department and our training department. And the deload is more throwing than it is training. So guys will continue to rip the weights, when they're, deloading their throwing, and then they'll continue to map it out with throwing and training working together, making sure that they're on the same page and they're not, contradicting to each other, whether it's like, lifting the day before a bullpen or something like that when they're really starting to, throw a little bit harder.
Can you
Okay.
talk a little bit about the evals that you do, especially during the off season or the fall season?
Yeah, so a lot of the evals that we do are movement based. We've just started incorporating some more performance metrics. So we have force plates and we have dynamometer, which is force plate in a sense for ER and IR of the shoulder. So the athletes will put their arm in a position and they'll press onto a force plate, if you will, and we'll get to read. It's more for asymmetries. So we'll see like side to side what they look like,
Hmm.
to see if their throwing shoulder is drastically lower from a strength standpoint than their non throwing shoulder, which is a huge indicator of injury. So more sit in the office, talk to the athletes and the parents about why they're here, what they're doing, injury history, training history. Are they planning on playing? What does their throwing schedule look like? What does their training schedule and playing schedule look like? Our pitching department will also join us in that conversation, which is awesome. That way, we're all on the same page. They'll ask questions specifically about them warming up to throw. What does their throwing routine look like? When do they throw bullpens? Tell me about the last 6 months of your baseball career. How many innings have you thrown? So on and so forth. And then we'll do pretty much like the first few evals are going to be in the office, with see how your shoulders move. They'll take their shirts off. We'll see what their scapulas do. We'll see what their toe touch looks like. Can they do a push up? I think that's a huge red flag actually for me. I was actually having a conversation with a dad and an 11-year-old that's going to turn 12 in November. He's had elbow pain for about 6 or so weeks. And he's like, well, I think it's the way he throws. And I'm like, well, can he do push-ups? And he said, yeah, you can, and I watch him, and they were not good, right? So it's like, I think the bigger red flag is the fact that your son's throwing a lot, throws pretty hard, probably, based on what you're telling me, and he can't do push-ups, right? So like, it's not necessarily the way that you throw a baseball. It's more like, hey, you throw, however you need to throw. Like all three of us look different. We're gonna move differently. Like we're all gonna throw differently, and there's not one way to throw. It's just like we all need to be strong in the positions that we're trying to get into, right? So that is ultimately what our eval does for us is it kind of brings up like, hey, do you have a lot of range of motion? Do you not have any range of motion? We'll take a look at the athletes, straight leg raise, hip range of motion, shoulder range of motion on the table, and we piece together a plan to make sure that they're able to throw the way that their body wants them to throw from a strength standpoint and a mobility standpoint. So like I said, big red flag for me is when an athlete comes in, he throws pretty hard and he has a hard time doing push-ups. It's probably not a mechanical issue. It's probably the fact that like your body's not physically prepared to throw at the level that you're throwing at.
Interesting. This
Yeah.
is go
Yeah.
ahead, Johnny.
Like, I guess, because you're ramping your body up all throughout the off season to prepare for in season, and say an athlete is recovering through that process, but needs to, have mobility. Like, I guess more so. You mentioned asymmetrical, and I was thinking like both sides of your body do have to have similarities. Is it really bad when they're very uneven? Like, because you're not saying they need to be like ambidextrous throwing from both sides, but do their
That would
half
be awesome.
really cool. And I think there's a guy right now.
Yeah.
Probably making his way up. But is it weird though? Like when like your throwing side is just more constricted, but your left side, an athlete's left side is more so open, more mobile.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, it's either yes or no, right? Like it's also what makes you great. So there's some asymmetries that are also why you're as good as you are, and then what makes you great might also make you hurt. So
Right.
I
Yeah.
think it's just trying to piece together more or less like why the athlete, got hurt in the first place, and then making sure that they're just on the right, path moving forward, right? So I would say like ultimately performance should always be from, spring on through the end of summer. And then there should be a massive, deloaded to a revamp from, September all the way through December, no matter what state you're in. And our goal is just to make sure that guys are on that trajectory. And every time they're not, like we have to work backwards to get them there, right? Like the concept of getting better and building off of every single year is making sure that from little league all the way through their high school seasons, that's exactly how it looks, right? Like there shouldn't be any year where it doesn't look like that for the most part, right?
Right. So this is an unfair question. You talked about when you were at Rowan and even in high school that you just didn't know what you didn't know, right? Until
Yeah.
you started training. I mean, what percentage would you say of youth baseball teams, coaches, middle school, even high school, have a program that you would consider to be um, acceptable for athletes that are preparing for their season? I mean, is it less than 50%?
Yeah, I mean, I would, yeah, I would say so. We do a lot of, me and one of our other coaches, Yasser, do all of our remote training. So if like you never ever stepped foot in a gym, in our gym, we could work with you fully remote. We have this whole platform that works. And we've been doing a lot of programming in addition to their school list because specific schools in specific states like mandate that you have like a lifting class. So we do get to see what all of these programs look like. And yeah, I think Eric always says this best. Like let's say there's 10 guys in a group training and like maybe two will get really good, two will, get a little bit better, you know, two will be mediocre and stay mediocre, two will get worse, and then two guys will just completely fall off, right? So that's the major difference between what we do and what, anybody does is obviously we have the accessibility and the knowledge to individualize everything, which is ultimately the goal for everybody, right? Because like I said before, we're all different, but they're doing best with what they think they're doing, and ultimately like not everybody is benefiting from it, and unfortunately that's just the model of and the nature of a specific group training. But yeah, I've never seen one where I'm like, wow, that's elite.
Right. And so I know a lot of what you do when you are training is to do cumulative repetitive movements that are going to, like the compounding that
Yep.
was mentioned before. Like, can you, within the program that you write, can you talk about how you incorporate that compounding and what it might look like for a youth player
Yeah. So
in the
more or
macro?
less,
In the macro.
yeah, in the macro, more or less making sure that, especially at that age, that they're having a blast doing it, right? Want them to fall in love with the weight room is probably the first and foremost, important thing, because if they hate doing it, it doesn't matter like how good the program is, they're
Right.
not going to want to come in.
Right.
So yeah, I would say, y- y- you know, everybody should be lifting. It's just a matter of like what's the right implement rather than what's the right exercise. So for example, all three of us are, able to do split squats properly. And then if I had a 12-year-old with me, he would also be able to do split squats. But, I might go, bar in the front, maybe somebody goes body weight, maybe somebody goes goblet, right? So like we have just all these foundational movements that we definitely want athletes to understand how to do, right? Like everybody should know how to do a split squat. Everybody should know how to, do a regular squat. Everybody should know how to do a RDL or a hinge. Everybody should know how to do a row. Like there is no specific exercises that are like age specific. It's more just like what is the implement that was going to fit this specific athlete. And then from there, we're just tracking. So we do force plate testing with all of our guys, younger guys, force plate testing. So they do jumps twice a week if they come in twice a week. And then we'll just continue to track and see where they're at. And, the younger guys are, there's never very linear with their, improvements with jumping, just because there's so many different variables when it comes to a jump. Like, one kid can jump like a 11 or 12, and then the next three are like 8, just because they're so uncoordinated, right? So I just want to track and find trends to make sure that ultimately they're not like, I would say for those force plate jumps, it's making sure they're not going from like an average of like 9 to an average of 7, right? That's where I'm like, hey, like, are you exhausted? What's going on? Are you hurt? Like, are we
Right.
doing too much? Are you doing too much? Stuff like that. So,
The remote interests me a great deal. The more I heard you talk about it, because I mean, it may be something that Johnny and I might explore here. Is that something that with your new app that you incorporate that as part of the remote training? Like, because you mentioned
yes.
last time that the app is kind of an exciting thing. What you're
Yep.
working.
Yep. Yeah. So the app, I would assume, should be done. I mean, it's like officially done. I can actually show it to you on my phone. We're in pilot mode right now. So, um, this is the app.
Oh, look at that. We get it here first at All Things Baseball Podcast. Maybe not first, but we're going to get it.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, you could click on any of the links. Let me see what we got. Upper body. Oh, 1 second. Sometimes it doesn't work with the Wi-Fi. But yeah, you're going to be able to click link on your program, and then it'll just bring you right to one of these videos that's currently not loading. Of course, that's why it's still in pilot mode.
Right. But that,
And then you'll get a full on video of one of
yeah.
our coaches explaining basically how to properly execute the exercise. So
Wow.
yeah, everybody that's remote will be able to get access to that.
See, that to me, that's very exciting because I mean, obviously, you can't have laptops in the gym. Well, you can, but you rarely have laptops in the gym or pieces of paper going over your custom program. To have
Yep.
the app there is you can have your phone there and go right to it. So that's going to
Yep.
be a game changer for you, right?
Yeah, we're excited, and it's very detailed. Some of the videos in our old database, I'm trying to get this to work right now so I can show you guys. Some of the videos in our old database are like 15 years old and they're so outdated. So we just spent the last year re-recording all of
Right.
these, and we're also going to continue to upload more videos every month as part of the subscription. So
Yeah.
not only if you work remotely you're going to get access to it, but it's going to be available to anybody around the world, whether it's like you guys and you want to pay for a membership to use with your training when you bring in some of your younger athletes, or a gym in a different country, or even just some of the just random athletes or random people that want to just kind of mess around with a database that they have access to with basically how to properly execute videos. So
Right.
it's going to be a lot of different things once it starts out, which we're excited about.
Yeah, and I think what's cool you mentioned earlier too, touching on body weight versus using equipment. What age do you would you incorporate more of equipment, bands, weighted balls, or the equipment that you guys use at the facility?
Yeah, good question. So I would say the way that we think about training is more along the lines of like, obviously strength is super important, but I would rather teach somebody how to move properly than not, right? So if that means that I'm going to do something body weight because it looks better than adding some weight to it, I'm going to be okay with that.
Yeah,
But at the same point in time, there needs to be a point where they do go up in weight, because body weight is not going to continue to stress their body.
yeah,
So for example, I have a 12-year-old kid who I work with who is like, I just love working with him, man. He's an awesome kid. We have a blast working together. Like, we kind of, bust each other's balls all the time. And he's 12, and I had him, so safety squat bar, handles in the front, bar in the back. And I think he put 20 pounds on each side. So the bar's 55. So 25 or 20, 20, 40, 55, 95 pounds. So he's probably squatting somewhat around body weight, regarding just the bar on his back. But again, he built up to it, right? And honestly, sometimes with those younger athletes, like, weight makes it look better because they have to create tension so they don't fall over.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, ultimately the goal is like, swinging a baseball bat is probably more dangerous than doing a push up, right? Like, you're torquing your spine, you're getting in all these positions. So why would you not just try to make sure that they're doing it properly, right? So that's what we use lifting for. Lifting as a means to teach, rather than just, lifting as a means to just, bust it out and get strong and not really care what the specific form looks like.
right. That makes
Right.
a lot of sense. Yeah,
Yeah. Absolutely.
And we
Absolutely.
don't really use, I think one of the biggest things too is relative to other big facilities is we use plyo balls as a means to teach as well. So like athletes will have like a few drills and more it's like so they can feel their arm before they go throw rather than like, there's some facilities that are like, hey, the reason that you're not good at, throwing strikes is because you just don't throw enough plyo balls, right? So here's 15, 20 minutes of plyo ball stuff, and then go lift however you want. Where we're like, it's the opposite. The reason that you have a hard time throwing a strike is because you have a hard time controlling your body when you're moving. So let's just teach you how to move your body in the gym, make sure that you know how to do it with all different weights and different equipment and, different movements. And then we'll go through and watch how much more control you have of your body. And obviously we've seen that success story over and over and over again because that's what we do for, all of our livings and careers. But yeah, we're more like, use the gym as a means to teach whatever you need to do on the field, and that should carry over the more you do it, right? So if you have a hard time loading your hip when you're swinging or when you're throwing, like you probably need to do more hip loading in the gym. Like it's not like
Right.
all of a sudden you could load your hip if you don't have the context for it or the strength for it or the mobility for it, or even at that point add one more, just add the stability, right?
Right.
So a really young athlete is going to have a hard time feeling positions because they're probably loose. They have no idea where their body is, and they're not really strong in those positions. So that's not a plyo ball issue. That's more of a strength related issue, or a stability issue, or an awareness issue, or a combination of everything.
So
I,
as you're creating these habits for these young athletes, and I saw it somewhere on your site, it takes 21 days to create a good habit. Is that applicable also to the younger athlete, or was that more for?
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard because so many different athletes learn at different levels, right? I think
Right.
the biggest thing, so I have a really, really awesome presentation that I showed all the interns like one of the first weeks there just to get them an understanding for what they're doing. Like, again, they're just not just strength coaches, they're like movement specialists.
Movement specialist? Yeah.
So the two biggest factors when it comes to teaching somebody how to do something is frequency and recency. So the more frequently they do it and the more recent they do it, the better off they're going to understand it and learn how to do it, right? And you're obviously going against older memories, right? So that's just why we like to get athletes in the gym as much as we can, making sure that every single thing in their program is specific to what they need. Making sure that we're not contraindicating specific exercises based on what the pitching coach or the hitting coach is asking them to do.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay. So
mm,
we talk a lot about you know, obviously training program in the off season, and we wanted to ask you a little bit about integrating skill work while you're training. What are kind of, I don't know if this is the right way to ask it, do's or don'ts? Obviously you talked about deloading and ramping up and things like that, but if you're integrating skill work, just touch on that a little bit about how you recommend or what you do. Obviously you got a brand new facility down there that's so much bigger with a lot of space. Tell us how you plan to incorporate more skill work with your athletes.
Yeah, so I don't specifically do any skill work stuff. We have a pitching department and a hitting department that does all of that stuff. So
Okay.
they're usually like a half an hour or hour sessions. Um, Obviously throwing is not that long. It's more specific to whatever their throwing session is for the day. But I would say most of the people that we work with, especially at a young age, it's more of educating them on no, they should not go hit every day for 4 hours. It doesn't really make a bunch of sense.
Right.
So again, the same concept for, lifting applies to training, right? So you just asked me how long does it take to have somebody learn a specific skill, right? Or a specific movement or just whatever they can come back in the next day and do a split squat flawlessly because they finally figured it out. So fatigue is the enemy of motor learning, right? So the more fatigued I am, the harder it's going to be for me to repeat what I'm trying to do, right? So you take a 12-year-old kid that is, coming home from school. They're probably waking up early. They're probably not eating correctly. They're coming home from school at 4, and then they got to go hit for 3 hours. Like, are most of those swings even, relevant to what you're trying to get them to do? Probably not, right? Because fatigue is the enemy of motor learning, and swinging is a very, very specific skill. So yeah, I think a lot of the athletes that we work with, they get drastically better, especially at that age, because we ask them to do less. And when they do less, they get more out of the specific swings that they're taking, right? Or the specific throws that they're throwing.
Mm.
So, yeah, I don't really have a specific like black and white answer for that,
No problem.
mainly
Yeah.
because, it's just more along the lines of like having athletes understand like you should not be swinging for 3 or 4 hours a day or taking ground balls for 3 or 4 hours a day. Like, have 30 minutes of really good quality work and then, go eat more. Like, you're better off eating more and sleeping better because that's going to ultimately make your recovery better and you're going to be able to give more out of it the next day than, just, driving yourself bonkers trying to, swing, 1,000 different swings for, 3 hours.
Do you guys do any like exchange, international exchange of ideas on training, like with Dominican Republic or or Japan, or like, is there ever any conferences where you get to hear what people are doing in other countries to see how it compares?
Maybe in the future, not as of now, but I will tell you that we do have every single year we have big leaguers from the Dominican come in, we have big leaguers from Japan and Korea come in, and they just love what we do. So I would imagine that we should be, hosting that type of seminar just because
Right,
I
right.
know a lot of different cultures, like obviously in Japan and Korea, like they go crazy from the moment they're, okay, you're going to be a baseball player to the moment that they're, but then it's weird because when they get to the big leagues, their big leagues is drastically different than ours. I have a bunch of buddies that played over in Japan and they do a 7 day rotation. You don't really travel with a team when you're not playing. So they're exact opposite when they get older. And I think that's why a lot of those guys don't really get hurt as much. Yeah. So one of my buddies was over there with the Giants and he was on a 7 day rotation. He didn't have to travel when he, wasn't pitching, so he was able to stay at home with his wife and his son. And obviously, good food, stuff like that. So, but yeah, I mean, we have people from all over the world that will, I guess, more or less like the off season, big leaguers, they'll come over and they'll spend like the month of December with us. And, a lot of the guys from Dominican or Venezuela or, wherever they'll come, multiple times throughout the off season, they'll come here for a little bit and then go home for a little bit. So, um, to answer your question directly, no, but in a sense, I feel like we're doing it, without actually like hosting a seminar. It's more just like everybody loves what we do for the most part, so they'll come over and they'll hang out, they'll train, they'll hit, they'll throw, stuff like that.
Yeah. With the younger players, you'd mentioned also fatigue is a big problem when you're doing a lot of reps, and they find more success more so with successful repetitions, things that they can do over and over again, but not to the point where they're like exhausted.
Right.
When you find that maybe some exercises are not connecting or not working, and they might feel they're not as motivated, how do you kind of work them back or connect with them on a level that like they're like, oh, okay, that connects. I get it now.
I don't necessarily like think that there's too hard of an exercise if the coach that's writing the program like understands the specific athlete, but it comes down to understanding the specific athlete and knowing where they are in like a mental headspace. They even want to be there because you could give an exercise to anybody that doesn't want to be there and they're not going to perform it well. But ultimately, I think I always say, give it 3 weeks, and then just, that'll be your answer. Right. So obviously, if any of us were coming to the gym for the first time, we'd probably look like fools, if we didn't really know what we were doing. But then depending on how good the coaching is, how good the program is, and then how often any of us are in there is going to be a massive difference in 3 weeks. Right. So we do have athletes that look different day one that they do, week three. And I think that's ultimately the goal. Right. So, it's more along the lines of like we're teachers, right? And I always say this to all of our interns too and our coaches, like, hey, we're teachers. Like the program is, you can't have a 12-year-old understand, geometry if they don't even know the numbers yet, right? So like to make complexity and add complexity where it shouldn't be right now is definitely not, valuable for anybody. Even though it might look cool on paper, it doesn't make a difference, right? So, um, yeah, like I said, I for the most part could probably coach anybody into a split squat, and then what I do with that split squat from there is going to be based on, where I think this athlete is, right? But there's not really like any specific exercises that we do in the gym that are like, whoa, that athlete's going to hurt themselves or,
Right.
it's going to look the same in 3 weeks, right? I think if it's a good program, it's a good coach, and if it's a good, a high level, highly motivated athlete, like I think things will look drastically different in 3 weeks, and that's the goal.
Gotcha.
Awesome.
For me, I wanted to just mention to you that Johnny and I are like, we champion the average talented ball player that has a great desire to, loves baseball, loves to train, but their talent is average. So we
Right.
tend to champion them. We try to stay in our lane too, and that's why we like to talk about youth. We have some great coaches that Johnny's been coached by. Coach Adam Mosley is in Hoover, Alabama, is one of the best coaches around in the country. Coach Brian Utley is one of the greater trainers. So we try to steer people towards the people we think
Yeah.
locally here that are maybe best for pitching and for training, stuff like that. But the average talented youth player, they obviously can, if they love baseball and they're gym rats, they can make a difference. Maybe not necessarily college and beyond, but they can make a difference if they can get to their high school team. In your experience in the last 10 years doing this, you've probably seen some kids with amazing talent and you've seen some kids with average talent. Can you talk a little bit about the kids that have taken their talent and then just reached heights that maybe they didn't even know they could reach?
Yeah, we have a ton of their jerseys hanging on our walls. We actually do have a bunch of, middle schooler to big league athletes. Um, so, it's just want to get in front of, like you said, you guys have really good coaches. Really good coaches are really good mentors and really good people. And then you want them, just to be around good people and keep developing. It's hard to say that at 12 you're going to be a big leaguer. And it's even hard to say as a first rounder that you're going to be a big leaguer, right? So the goal is just to keep building on every single year, making sure that you're on good coaches, you're on good people, you enjoy doing as the athlete, that you enjoy doing all the stuff that it takes to be, greater every single day, and then enjoying the process. So yeah, like I said, we do have a lot of, you know, guys on our wall, jerseys are hanging on our wall that started at the gym when they were 13, 14 years old. And, now they're, big leaguers, or they, had an opportunity to throw in a big league game. So it's just making sure that every single time you do something, you're doing something right. And, some of those 12-year-old kids, you'd probably never guess were going to be big leaguers. They just didn't miss a beat, right? They never gave up. They never stopped. They hit their training sessions when they needed to. They listened to their coaches when the coaches were giving them advice, stuff like that. So
Right.
That's awesome.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So before we let you go, what can you share with us? Obviously, the app's going to it's in pilot mode. We'll put it in the description, whatever you want us to put in there, so people can, know more about what you guys do. How can we best share what you guys are all about and what you're doing?
yeah, I think it's CresseyPerformance.com. We have two different locations. One is in Hudson, Massachusetts, and that's currently expanding, and then our other one is in Palm Beach Gardens. So, just take a look at the website, scroll through it. If you like what you see, reach out. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I think there's actually like a different box on each specific website. Type in your information, whether it's your phone number, your email address, combination of both, and ask questions. So, whatever it is, information that you might be looking for, or guidance in specific states. Like, we have networks and we have different interns and, former coaches all over the country. So, whatever you guys need, you could find that on our website. I think CresseyPerformance.com, and then click on one of our locations.
Great. Well,
Awesome.
thanks for joining the podcast, man. We learned a lot. We hope everybody who was listening and watched learned too. We
Thank
really
you.
Yeah,
appreciate
thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Go Yankees. Hopefully they do something the next few days.
it. Yeah, hopefully.